Hey, everybody. Welcome to Military Monday with ClearedJobs.Net. Today's July the 15th, 2024. And myself and Sara McMurrough, we're going to be talking today about operational risk management when it comes to the hiring process. We want to find out, are you a risky hire? And if you are, what can you do about it? So let's go ahead and first of all, say hello. My name is Bob Wheeler. I'm with ClearedJobs.Net. I have been here for 10 years. And prior to that, I was in the Navy, did 20 years in the Navy, was a recruiter at the very end of that gig. So that's how I got into the recruiting thing. And I still live by Camp Lejeune. I'm still connected to the base. I've got a son that was in the Marine Corps that just recently got out. My daughter married a Marine. So I'm still very much tied into that active duty scene. And I talk to people who are transitioning all the time. We're happy to share some tips with you today. So that's who I am. Sara, do you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara McMurrough. I've been here for almost 9 years, I think. And, my background, I was in the Army National Guard for about 10 years. I am a military spouse to an active duty Army officer. So we live just outside of Fort Liberty. Almost said Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty. So I'm not too far from Bob. But in addition to that, I've also been a recruiter in this industry and was for almost 10 years. So, a lot of a lot of experience in kind of putting the two together and understanding how that all works.
Yeah. So if you're joining us here on LinkedIn Live or anything else, let us know where you are, where you're at. What are you in the service now? You just got out. What kind of things are you doing? Give us a shout on LinkedIn. Let us know. We're going to talk today about the risky hire piece. We live in this space, Sara and I, between the job seekers and the employers. So we're always talking to both. And this is the kind of thing that I think sometimes job seekers don't always get, but we definitely hear it from the recruiters and the hiring people that they don't want to have to do the hiring a second time, right, Sara? That's the biggest risk when it comes down to it, right?
Right. It's very expensive.
Yeah. And it's time consuming. It's all that kind of stuff, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to start off by talking about just the different parts of the hiring process to start off with. I used to have old first sergeant always wonder who's who in the zoo and what do they do? That's what you always want to know. And we're going to talk about this when it comes to the hiring process and just in general. So first of all, there's three different people processes, whatever you want to say, that go on to the hiring process. The first is the hiring manager. This is sometimes I've talked to people, Sara, that are in the service, and they think that the hiring manager is an actual person, but it's not a real job title. It's just somebody who's authorized to hire. It's like they're the program manager and they've been given the authority to hiring, but recruiting is not their real job. Their real job is to do whatever the business is, right? That's the hiring manager.
Right. Oftentimes, and it can, I think what's really important to understand is it really differs by company. So when I was a recruiter in this industry, there were times when I was a hiring manager and I was the program manager at the same time for a particular contract, but I was not the hiring manager for other contracts.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the company.
Yeah, we bring this up because when you're coming out of the service, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, you need to connect with the hiring manager. You got to find the hiring manager. Like that's the key person." And in a lot of ways, the hiring manager is the key person, but it's not the end all be all. There's also other folks that do stuff in the military, or not military, in the hiring process. There's also the recruiter. The recruiter is somebody that interfaces with the job seekers and the hiring managers. They'll guide the job seeker through the process. This is not the same as being a recruiter. If you think to yourself, "Oh, I had a lousy recruiter when I joined the Army," or "They all lied to me," or you spend your time in the service, you get nothing but horror stories about recruiters. And if you were a recruiter, you know how hard of a job that is, and you're just going crazy. The recruiters here are a little bit different, but they're really focused on trying to explain the job and find the right people for the job to bring that slate of candidates to the hiring manager for the interview process. And then there's also somebody, you'll see somebody called a sourcer sometimes. And this is somebody whose job it is not to recruit. They're not really talking to job seekers as much. They're finding people. And maybe if they're going to do any kind of talking at all, it might be an initial interview, a job screening thing. They're just going to find out, do you have the certs that you say? Are you really interested? Are you real? That kind of thing. So you've got the hiring manager, the recruiter, the sourcer, but Sara, talk about this process, how it kind of fits together, because sometimes it's separate. Sometimes it's all one person doing these things.
Right. And again, like I mentioned, the hiring manager I was a hiring manager for some things and not for others. So I think what's really important to understand is in smaller companies, you may have less people in this process, right? Or these steps. A lot of smaller companies don't have sourcers. You'll see that a lot more at the really, really large companies that, most of the time I'd say our transitioning service members, that's who they say first, right? Those companies, all the big names that they know, those ones oftentimes have the sourcers, but a lot of times the smaller ones don't. And I'll tell you, as a recruiter in this industry, I was all three of those in some instances. We never had a sourcer, but I recruited for a lot of different things within the same company. And then I had different hiring managers that I worked with depending on the contract or depending if it was a corporate position. So there are three layers, or could be up to three layers. And I suppose some companies may have even more layers than that. But, probably the most common, you're going to have someone doing the recruiting. It may not always be the recruiter. Someone's doing the recruiting and someone's making the decision.
Yeah. And the reason to understand this is the different, like she said, different companies do it differently. And the takeaway from this is that every process could be different. There is no silver bullet one way to get hired. And you might talk to one of your buddies who got out and says, oh, I got my job. It's a great job. This is exactly how I did it. That just because they did it one way doesn't mean it's going to be the same for another company. And if it's a big enough company, it actually could be a different process because it's a different hiring manager that they're reporting to. So all we want to do is we want to figure out how things are working so that as a job seeker, we can kind of go with the flow. We can answer the questions that those people are talking about, and that we can be an easy person for them to talk to based upon their job. So those are some things that you're going to hear. Now let's talk about the preferred sources of hire, because remember, we're talking here risk management. The worst thing that can happen for a company is to hire somebody and that person doesn't work out because they got to start that process all over again. So they love to start with the internal promotions. I mean, this is something that is a known quantity. You're already there. If they're going to get a promotion, they'd rather hire somebody that they know. And think about your time in the military. It's probably the same way. If you had a great person who was doing the job at one level, you'd love to move them up to the next level because they were trusted already. So that's the first part. Secondly, you might get this referrals from current employees. This is kind of the second stage because you're trusting somebody. They prefer to have somebody who can vouch for them to kind of say, we need to talk to this person. Then you move on to where people that they find. So now you got your recruiters. They're looking at job boards. They're going to places. They're talking to people. They're looking because they know if they find the right person or they feel comfortable, they can engage the conversation. It's still on their terms. And then finally, at the bottom end of that is people who find them. And that would be you as a job seeker, just blindly applying through websites or just shoot something on social media. So those are the four different ways they do things. Sara, look, talk to us about the fact that the problem is, look, hiring managers would rather start here and too many job seekers start there. So let's talk about these different things a little bit.
So, like Bob said, for the internal promotions, you're talking about someone that the company has already worked with. They are already successful. You don't have to go through the onboarding, any of those things that we already know who they are. So someone who's doing, A job is now going to move up to B job, opening up maybe a lower level position, but an internal promotion is the greatest place to start, right? Less risk. But a lot of times for job seekers, because especially when we're talking about our transitioning service members, they're not in that process already, right? They don't have those relationships within the company that they want to get hired for. They're already there and getting promoted. So they think, well, the quickest thing I can do is I made my new LinkedIn account. I'm just going to connect with everyone I can and send them a message and try to get a job or just apply for everything that they see. And we're not saying, don't apply for anything, but there are a lot of steps that you can do in the middle that will kind of move you up this totem pole, right? You want to be higher up on this little list that we're looking at and not way at the bottom.
Yeah, and we're going to talk towards the end of our little conversation here about networking, because networking really is, when you do it well, is what gets you up inside there. We'll talk a little bit about the way we both got hired here at ClearedJobs.Net 9 or 10 years ago, and I'll just a little bit of a spoiler alert. I actually met somebody here from ClearedJobs.Net while I was attending a recruiting conference, because I thought I wanted to be a recruiter when I got done, because that's what I was doing in the Navy, was recruiting. And the person that I met at the conference ended up being somebody who worked here. I got to know that person very well over the next year and a half. And then when I was getting out of the military, ClearedJobs.Net was hiring, so I became a referral from a current employee, essentially. But I got to know that person through networking. We're going to talk more about that, and we'll listen to Sara's story a little bit too, because she's got a little bit of a different story of how she got here, but it was still kind of like a networking piece. So this is why it's so important, because the networking pushes you up closer to where you want to be as far as that thing goes. But again, risk management. If you're in the military, I mean, we used to do risk management worksheets for everything from combat operations to change of command ceremonies. I mean, Marine Corps birthdays, cake cutting ceremonies. There's a risk management decision. So if you're in the military, you should have a good idea about what ORM really is. But now just think, you're the risk. You're the risk on the higher part, right, Sarah?
Exactly. Because I mean, they're making a time investment on you, a financial investment on you once they start that conversation. So where you start and that totem pole that we were looking at before is really important, because there's less risk as you move up in, for the company.
And risk is perceived. I mean, this is where veterans can be very frustrated, because they say, I know I can do the job. I don't know why they're not talking to me. It's the perception of the risk from the hiring perspective. So just like any other ORM thing, you can analyze the risk and then you evaluate it, then you treat it and you monitor. We're going to talk about how to mitigate some of those risks here in a second. It's how you can put yourself in the best light so you don't appear so risky. So what kind of risks are we talking about? What kind of things are we doing? We're going to talk. Let's take the first two. You can't do the job. They're worried you won't be able to do the job. They're worried you're going to hire it and you just can't do it. But equally, they could be very also worried that you might do it too well, meaning maybe you're overqualified for the job.
Right. And we hear that a lot. Well, I already know how to do that. I can just do it. But, if it's something that you as a professional, learned how to do 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever, the company's thinking, well, they're probably going to get pretty bored and they won't want to stay there. And what if we don't have a position to promote them into? Then they're just going to leave and we're going to start this process all over again.
And exactly that. The veteran mind thinks, well, they should want me because if I'm so awesome, I'll be even better, because in the military, you get that way. If you working in a command and you inherit, you get somebody gets orders and shows up and he or she's an E5 and they're just like, wow, they can work at an E7 level. You love it because they can't leave. They're stuck there. Whereas in the real world or the private sector, if someone says, well, you know what, I could do more than this, they'll leave. That's the whole thing, that they're worried that you might leave because they don't have anything for you to do. These other two here, you don't like the work environment or the work environment doesn't like you. This is a culture fit, right, Sarah?
It is. It's definitely a culture fit. And I've heard a lot of different scenarios in my time here at ClearedJobs, because I talk to and interface with a lot of recruiters and hiring managers. And one particular company that I work with, they had told me at one point they brought in this new recruiting manager, and a lot of the recruiters under this recruiting manager were not happy because that recruiting manager came in with that military mindset and tried to run things just like it was done on the military side. So that current work environment that was already there was not pleased with how the new recruiting manager came in to do things. It was not a good fit. And eventually they were able to work through it and have conversations to make it work, but there's not always time to do that. And sometimes the company will say, but no thank you, or the recruiting manager who was hired in this case might say, you know what, this isn't working for me, and here we are again starting this process all over again.
Yeah. And this is not necessarily like an EO type thing. I mean, this could be as simple as just like the culture is like, it's very collaborative and team oriented, and you're the kind of person that just wants to stick in your cubicle and just do your job, or vice versa. You're an open person that wants to share everything and likes to, do lots of different things, and their process is more stuck, to cubicles. All of that stuff always comes back to, are you going to leave? Or is somebody else going to leave? Are they going to lose people and have to start this process all over again? The last one on there, as far as a risk goes, is maybe you won't like the area or the location. And this was interesting. I had a company that was one of our clients a while back. They were in Hawaii. I was talking to the recruiting manager. Actually, he was the owner of the company, a small company. And he wouldn't hire people, or he was very leery to hire people who didn't already come from Hawaii. And the reason was, he said, because I used to hire people. He's like, I'd hire somebody because it looked like they were a great fit. They would do the whole thing. They would say, I'd love to move to Hawaii. It's going to be great. But then once they got there, they found out that it was way more expensive than they thought. Or a big thing probably had was people found out that it was so much harder to get back home if there was a family emergency. My mom is sick and she's in Colorado and I'm in Hawaii type thing. So he was very concerned about people coming over there because they would end up saying, I love the company, I love the place, but I can't be here. And they would leave. And then, of course, he's back to square one. So that's part of that whole ORM piece that's going on there. So we've talked about some of those things. We've talked about some of the things of why they're legitimate risks. And that's the first step, is just admitting that they're risks. Now, Sarah, let's break into what we can do to treat them or mitigate them or whatever to kind of put ourselves in the best light. That first one, what can we do if the problem is either you're going to do the job too well or you can't do it at all? What kind of things can a job seeker do to mitigate that?
Well, if we're talking about not being able to do the job, if that's the concern, and this, we've done a lot of, podcast types of things on helping transitioning service members to help their resumes match the outside the military, if that makes any sort of sense. It's not coming out very clearly, but being able to, one, just make your resume speak to people that are outside of the military, right? Having someone outside the military review that resume, but also making sure that you're going through that position description if we're either applying for or you're in a conversation already with a company, and maybe it's part of the referral or someone and they're saying, hey, get me your resume. Make sure that it includes all of those things that you've done that match the position that you're looking for. Because if they're already concerned that you can't do it, well, you better make sure that your resume shows it, because they might not come back and say, hey, because you did this, did you not do this? Or what, one of those things. It needs to just say it, because they don't want to have to ask the question.
Yeah. And also asking good questions when you're in the position for those things. When you get to the resume, or not the resume, the interview, ask lots of good questions, because if it's something that maybe it's an important piece of the job that wasn't in the job description, your resume didn't necessarily cover it, but when you ask those questions, you might be able to answer the question in the affirmative of saying, oh yeah, I've done that too. Or let me tell you a story about how I've done that. That's something that's important. So asking questions, and also, you don't want to be in a position. There's stats out there of how many people come out of the military, get a job, and a year later they leave. Asking good questions for you, it's not bad if you find out you're not a good fit. I mean, if you find out that you've never really done this, it's okay to think, well, I'm glad I discovered that right now. So asking those honest questions is going to help position you. If you are a good fit, that they're going to see that. And if you're not a good fit, you're going to know that. All right. Matching the environment. Sarah, let's talk about some stuff that they can do, job seekers can do to make sure that they're finding themselves as a good fit for a work environment.
I think a lot of those questions, like you said, during the interview process, maybe when you're talking to the recruiter before you even have a higher level interview, making sure that you're really understanding that position, and, knowing if there are opportunities to advance, because remember, that's that first one on the list on that totem pole, the top of the totem pole. They want to hire people, or they want to move people from within up, right? They want those opportunities for advancement. So make sure you, as the job seeker, are asking those questions as well. What opportunities are there? Are there higher level positions on this contract? What other types of contracts do you have? Because I think it also just shows initiative, don't you think?
Oh yeah, it's a big time with the initiative part. It really lets people know that you're serious about the job and the company. Telling the interview about references you have inside the organization. I know a lot of times, like nowadays, you don't need to put references on your resume and things like that unless they ask for things. But when you get to the interview part, remember, when you get to an interview, you've pretty much met the technical qualifications. You should be basically competent for the job, they think. Now it's all about the fit. If you know people who either work specifically in that department or at least in that company, bring that up and say, yeah, I've got a friend who does this with the same company, and they this is how they describe the thing. So, because what you want to get across is that you understand what you're getting yourself into. And they're going to feel like, well, if you understand it, you want to be successful too. That's a good thing. When I recruited for the Navy, I recruited doctors for the Navy. So there was a board process. It wasn't just, turn and burn, sign up every month type stuff. People had to get selected for those scholarships and things. And the people who had done things, if they had military family members, if they had done things, worked in hospitals before, because we were hiring them to be doctors before they went to medical school, all of that stuff went in as a positive, because people said if they really didn't like it, they would be opting out right now. They were able to show that they had some kind of understanding of what they were getting themselves into. So same deal. If you know people, if you've worked into something similar, bring it up. Don't wait for them to ask either. Just proactively bring that up in your interview piece. All right. The work location. Sarah, we kind of covered this already a little bit, but anything that we missed on, what we can do to deal with the work location?
I think that, Bob, you have another really great example too, when you were interviewing for a position, right? And then you learned down the road that the reason that they weren't corresponding with you further or moving further in the process was because they had been burned before,
Yeah.
on a commute, right?
There's a
So
commute.
be
Yep.
very honest about, I am okay with this commute. I've been doing it for years. We live about 45 minutes outside of Fort Liberty, and so for my husband, when he retires here in a couple of years, we're open to him working back at Liberty or in Raleigh because we are used to that commute, or he's used to that commute. Now, it would be a completely different scenario if you were trying to convince me to commute one of those ways. I haven't done that in a decade. And so I would be much more risk, a much higher risk to put in a position in that area than my husband, because he's been doing it for so long. It's just part of his life at this point.
Yeah, and the story that she's alluding to, when I was getting out, it really hit me when I realized that even though I said I could do the commute, I mean, I was working in the Navy recruiting, I was driving all over the place, didn't bother me at all. The fact was, the reason that position was open was because the person just previous to me had quit because of a similar commute. They had started there, they worked there, and they said, you know what, this is getting too long. And eventually they actually just ran into, through networking, we're going to talk about, they ran into a better job that was closer. So they were like, oh, I'm going to leave. So they were gun shy based upon the previous people. And, I think that we need, as veterans, need to remember that it's, these hiring managers aren't coming into it with a blank slate. They've got previous experience of people they've hired that have done well and people who haven't done well, people who've left, people who've stayed. And that's going to affect what they're looking at. So we, as a veteran, we're trying to be honest, but just understand where they're coming from. So networking, we have danced around networking, Sarah, a couple times now. And it's the kind of thing that people always talk about. I think that unfortunately it can be the kind of thing that people get frustrated with when they're still in. So let's talk a little bit about what it's not. It's not talking to everybody you meet or asking for a job, is it?
It is not. It is not. And it's not a short game. It is a long game. Networking does not happen overnight. It
Yeah.
is not, going to, one job fair and going to every company around the room and saying, hi, my name's Sarah and I want this job. But it's not a bad thing either. Networking is, we're going to go through a big list of what it really is, but there's a lot more involved. And it's not always that you're looking for a job in networking. That's not the main reason to network, right?
Yeah. It's all these things. What it is, it takes lots of different forms, participating in professional development. I mean, I mentioned that I met the person who got me this job because I was recruiting for doctors for the Navy. I wanted to be a good doctor recruiter when I got out, at least I thought I did. So I started going to the Baltimore area recruiters network, monthly meetings. And I ended up meeting people there. I was just going there to be a better recruiter, but I met people that were also doing that stuff. It can be teaching and volunteering, it can be accepting help from others. When people want to help us, they get to know you. So that's part of the, but when it all comes down to, Sarah, we like to use the phrase marinating in your industry, right? That's what networking can kind of really be encapsulated as, right?
Right, exactly. And like we talked about before this call, there's nothing worse than getting close to dinner or close to when you need your job and or your whatever your end state is, and you forgot to put the marinade on. Right? You need your marinade for, in dinner case, at least 4 hours. But the point is that it takes a while to marinate. It takes a long time to do your networking, and you can hit on, all of these 6 items or more. It's not a conclusive list, but there are a lot of different ways to network within the industry that you're interested in. And it takes a long time.
It does. I mean, my Guamanian chicken marinade takes a long time to prep it, but you got to put the chicken in for at least 4 hours. Because if you do it for only 2, you might as well not done it at all. And so if you want the Guamanian chicken marinade recipe, hit me up on LinkedIn and I will send it to you. What else about networking? Okay, this is the kind of thing that we get into where this is what people feel about networking. This, I talk to folks, they hear this phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so it's a cliche. And I hear people talk about that when they don't get a job. Well, I just didn't know the right people, whatever. So they feel like they feel like it's the dirty word. but it's really not, because networking is also about who knows you, you know, it's because I will say it this way: if you're great, but nobody knows you, then nobody knows you're great. So if you're doing good work, you need to be out there interacting with people, and the minute that you start to think to yourself, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know, you got to remember this part too. If you're terrible and everybody knows you, then everybody knows you're terrible. So your reputation is out there, or it should be. At least when you're networking, you're putting your reputation out there. So, if you're people make mistakes all the time, there's folks that are getting in trouble. You're losing your clearance because you're doing stupid stuff on YouTube or something like that, or on social media. All of a sudden you can become like, I'm not going to touch that person. Sara, this was kind of where we found you, was the
not being terrible. I wasn't being terrible.
No, not being terrible. No. Just the opposite.
Not being terrible.
You were point number 3. You were great. And I knew it, or we knew it. That's how we found you. You want to tell your story about how you got here as an example of this marinating in the industry part?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I was a recruiter before this. And interestingly, the reason that I became a recruiter at that particular company, it was not because I was a recruiter before. It was because my dad played football at Penn State. The owner of the company loved Penn State. And that was our connection. So really interesting how connections happen, right? But once that connection happened, I recruited for a long time, and I used ClearedJobs.Net and, a lot of other tools as a recruiter. Bob was my account manager. And then after, like I said, about 9 years, I got laid off from the company. Nothing terrible, just what needed to happen. I've been working remote for a long time. And Bob contacted me just a few days later, because we have those great relationships here at Cleared Jobs, between our account managers and our companies. And Bob, reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, we have this opportunity. I, think you've done a really great job at, as a recruiter, and I think you'd be a great fit here. Let's talk. So this was a good year or so of time. It wasn't what I was looking for. He wasn't looking for me, but the timing worked out, and we've been, inadvertently networking for quite a while.
And I think what's important to think about this is both of us ended up, when you look back at those different ways that people like to hire, we were at the top end. We weren't necessarily internal promotions because we weren't here yet, but we both had worked our way to be a solid referral. And the reason that it's such a gold standard, 9 or 10 years later, we're still here. And right. To be honest, when I approached Sara about a job, and when the person who was here approached me about a job, the first thing they said was, we've got this position, we think you'd be great at it. And we were both like, no, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound like me, but it was because the people who approached us knew the job, and because they had got to know us pretty well, they said, no, I think you can do this job. They knew the job. So this is a much different thing than just apply, blind apply through the thing there, through the application process type stuff. So that's why that marinating piece is, because the more they know you, now all of a sudden you're Sara McMurrough. You're not just a resume. And one of the comments we had from Blaine out there said, consistency is the key. 100%. It's the long game when you're doing this, and then you never know what's going to happen. You definitely never know what's going to happen. So other ways to marinate in the industry, Sara, we're just going to bring some stuff up here. We do podcasts. ClearedJobs.Net does podcasts. What kind of things can people learn from listening to this podcast series?
So with over 100 episodes, you are going to see a lot of different roles within companies. I think that's really important for transitioning service members, especially because you have not had a lot of experience in the industry. And this will explain that to you. We have owners of companies, presidents of companies, we have recruiters, hiring managers, program managers, all different roles within companies, and they're talking about a lot of different things too. So you can really learn a lot about the industry while you're doing your networking, and then you can even connect with some of these people that are relevant to you and start learning even more. There's so much out there.
Yeah, these are great. There's other podcasts too, but this is great because it, like Sara said, with so many episodes, you get a little bit of a different angle from everything. And they're 20, 25 minutes, but it's the marinating part. It keeps you there. And there might be some episodes when you scroll down that are really fit you perfect. They're like, oh, they're talking about exactly what I do. They're talking about exactly the location I'm looking for. Definitely pay attention to some of those as well. Some other ways that you can network and get out there and meet people is job fairs. We've still got some job fairs on tap for 2024. Sara, let's break some of these down that are coming up here. The first one's a virtual event, next month, 5 weeks from now.
Yes. Yeah. August 22nd. And so what's great about that is we know that especially, our transitioning service members are all over the country and even all over the world. And so the virtual events allow you to still participate in a job fair if you can't be there in person.
Yeah. And the other
So
ones that we
get
got
registered.
there, the other ones on the list there are all in person. The one in September is for polygraph cleared folks only. The one in September is in Huntsville, Alabama, which is actually in association with a conference. So if you do cybersecurity and you're in that area, come to that job fair, hit up that conference, talk to people, talk to lots of people, get out of your bubble. And then October 3rd is an in-person event for all clearance levels out in Tyson's Corner. Sarah and I are going to be at the Huntsville event together. We'll if you're there, we'll see you. Sarah will not be at October 3rd, but I will be at October 3rd. So if you happen to be in Tyson's Corner, swing by and definitely say hello. And of course, Sarah, anybody can always hit us up on LinkedIn, right? We're happy to talk to any veterans.
Absolutely. Love to connect and, help share our networks with you as well.
Yeah. So we've been 31 minutes. So we went a little longer than normal, usually about 30 minutes, but that's a pretty good thing. I really enjoyed this conversation, Sarah. I think that we hopefully shed some light on some things about people can understand, just how that process is, and they can understand what they can do to really always be thinking about mitigating that risk. So
Right.
anything else we got to talk about? Or are we going to say goodbye?
I think we're going to say goodbye because everyone wants to have some lunch at the end of their lunch hour if they have one.
That's right. Sounds good. Well, I will talk to you guys later, and I hope you have a
Okay.
great rest of your
Thank
day.
you so much. Have a great
Bye-bye.
one.